What's the difference between deviance and crime? Sociologists have had an interest in studying and understanding deviant behaviour since the earliest days of the discipline. In the late 19th century, for example, the French sociologist Émile Durkheim carried out a famous study of suicide. In the societies he studied, suicide was generally regarded as outside community and religious norms. In this study, Durkheim critically examined the predominant non-sociological ways of explaining suicide. He then provided a sociological explanation of why suicide rates change over time and why they differ across regions and countries. The term deviance originates from statistics, where a deviation is a variation from the mean. It includes but is a much wider category than crime. Nouns like deviate and deviant have been used to refer to people who differ in some way from the norm in society. This general concept of deviance was intended to help sociologists identify similarities among different kinds of rule-breaking behaviour within society. In sociology, the term deviance refers to personal properties of behaviour which violate social norms or laws and which may be subject to negative sanctions of one kind or another. Sociologists are generally interested in studying who makes the rules or laws people live by, who breaks them, why people break them, and what happens to them when they do. Deviance can include a potentially wide range of phenomena, from being obese, disabled or mentally ill, to slovenly personal grooming, inappropriate dress and a lack of manners, to alcohol and drug abuse, sexual misbehaviour, violence and other criminal activity. It's important to remember, though, that social norms are rarely uniform and homogeneous throughout any society. Behaviours regarded as deviant in some groups can be regarded as perfectly normal in others. Officially, the use of drugs like marijuana or cocaine is deviant, but it is a normal and acceptable part of life in many social groups. Sociologists will emphasise that so-called deviant behaviour is often itself very much governed by the rules and norms of the groups in which those individuals are members. The conflict between deviance and normality then can be either a social conflict between social groups within a society or a tension between an individual and broadly accepted social norms. An example of the first would be skateboard riding along a busy pedestrian walkway. An example of the second would be a mass shooting in a high school. The boundaries between the two categories can shift over time and they can often be blurred. One example here would be the case of fatal shootings by police of mostly black young men in the United States. It's a normal behaviour that the Black Lives Matter movement is working to make deviant. Another example would be mental illness, which moved from being regarded as a normal part of social life to being seen as deviant from about the 17th century onwards. Today, it's increasingly being framed again as a characteristic of human behaviour that can and should be accepted within normal social relations. If deviance is defined in relation to social norms or laws, then it will differ as norms and laws vary between societies and as societies change over time. In Anglo-Australian culture, for example, it's entirely normal for men to be alone at times with their sisters, mother-in-law or other women that they are not in approved sexual relationships with. However, this is not the case in Apache society in the United States. There, such behaviour is avoided because it's regarded as inappropriate. The anthropologist Philip Greenfeld, who studied the Apache, reported a personal incident where an Apache woman in her 90s turned her back on him for this reason as she spoke to him. Crime is a narrower category than deviance. It usually refers to violations of the criminal law which are punishable by law. It often overlaps with deviance, but the two categories shouldn't be equated with each other. If social norms or laws change in society, then so will what's defined as deviant and or criminal. It used to be entirely normal, and certainly not a crime, to drive a car without wearing a seatbelt and having consumed a large amount of alcohol. Both of these activities are now illegal, and in many respects also deviant. If you rode a bicycle in the Australian state of New South Wales without a helmet, you used to be a law-abiding citizen who was doing nothing unusual. However, by July 1991, it was compulsory for all bicycle riders in New South Wales to wear helmets when cycling. Riders who didn't wear a helmet were now breaking the law. The very same activity, riding a bike without a helmet, is today a crime in New South Wales. Technically, because the policing of bicycle helmets goes through periods of being more or less strict, so the wearing of bicycle helmets in reality lies on the border between a crime on the one hand and perfectly normal on the other. It's certainly not a crime in the many countries around the world without mandatory helmet laws. Indeed, in countries like the Netherlands, it would be deviant, but not against the law, to wear a helmet. The current example of behaviour that's on the boundary of deviance and crime is using a mobile phone while you're driving. It's a crime, but many people continue to do it, and in that sense, it's not clear whether and in what sense it's deviant. These examples all illustrate the complexity of the relationship between deviance and crime, and this is one of the many interesting issues in criminology and the sociology of crime and punishment. In summary, sociologists have studied deviant behaviour since the earliest days of the discipline. Second, deviance refers to personal properties of behaviour which violate social norms or laws and which may be subject to negative sanctions. Third, if deviance is defined in relation to social norms or laws, then it will differ as norms and laws vary between societies or change over time. Fourth, deviant behaviour is often as highly rule-governed as normal behaviour, and different social groups within a society can have different norms and values. Fifth, crime refers to violations of the criminal law which are legally punishable. Sometimes they are also regarded as deviant, but sometimes not.